The restaurant smelled like expensive steaks and danger. Chris Hendrix stood in front of Rebekah, his tattooed hand wrapped around her wrist like a steel trap. His eyes were cold and mean, like a bully who had never lost a fight. "You think you can look at me that way?" Chris said, his voice low and threatening. "Get on your knees and apologize, or you're fired. Your choice." Everyone in the restaurant went quiet. Chris's friends, big men in fancy suits who looked like they hurt people for money, all turned to watch. They were smiling, waiting to see the waitress break down and cry. But Rebekah didn't cry. She didn't even look scared. Instead, she did something that made everyone's mouths drop open. Her fist shot out, vast as lightning, and connected with Chris's jaw with a loud crack that echoed through the whole restaurant. Chris stumbled backward, shock spreading across his face. For the first time in his life, someone had hit him back. You know what they say about bullies, right? They think everyone is weaker than them. They think they can push people around forever. Well, Chris Hendrix was about to learn the hardest lesson of his life. Sometimes the quiet person in the corner is the most dangerous one in the room. Rebekah's name was simple, but her story wasn't. And this is the story of how a waitress nobody noticed became the one person a brutal mafia boss couldn't forget. But before we get to the exciting parts, before we talk about the underground fight that changed everything, let's start from the beginning. How are you doing today? Wherever you are right now, whether you're reading this before bed or during your lunch break, get comfortable. Because once this story starts, you won't want to stop reading. If you're enjoying this, make sure to like and subscribe. Share this with someone who loves stories about people who stand up to bullies, even when those bullies are the most dangerous people in the city. Trust me, you don't want to miss what happens when she finally stops hiding who she really. Now, let me tell you how it all began. Rebekah was 26 years old when she took the job at Hendrix's restaurant. It was called The Manor, and it was the fanciest restaurant in the whole city. The kind of place where rich people ate $100 steaks and drank wine that cost more than a car. She didn't want to work there forever. She just needed money, lots of it, and she needed it fast. You see, Rebekah had a secret, a big one. Her younger brother Marcus was sick and needed special care in a safe place far away from their old neighborhood. The medicine was expensive, the doctors were expensive, everything was expensive. So when Rebekah saw the job posting for the manor, "Excellent tips! Work with exclusive clientele," she applied immediately. She should have known something was wrong. On her first day, the manager, a nervous man named Vincent, who always looked like he, was about to cry, pulled her into a dark corner of the kitchen. "Listen very carefully," Vincent whispered, looking around like someone might be listening. "There are special rules here. Very important rules." Rebekah nodded, thinking he would tell her normal restaurant stuff. Don't be rude to customers, don't drop the plates. Always smile. But Vincent's rules were different. Rule number 1, when Mr. Hendrix is in the private dining room, you don't go in there unless he calls for you specifically. Rule number 2, you don't ask questions about what you see or hear. Rule number 3, you don't look Mr. Hendrix in the eyes unless he tells you to. And rule number 4, this is the most important one. You always treat Mr. Hendrix with respect. Do you understand? "Who is Mr. Hendrix?" Rebekah asked. Vincent's face turned white as a ghost. Just follow the rules and you'll be fine." Rebekah should have quit right then. Should have walked out the door and never come back. But she thought about Marcus in that hospital bed, about the bills that kept piling up, about how much he needed her. So she stayed. The first 2 weeks were normal. Well, as normal as working in a fancy restaurant could be. Rebekah served rich couples their expensive dinners, so she memorized which wine went with which food. She learned to be invisible, to bring the food, fill the glasses, and disappear before anyone really noticed her. She was good at being invisible. She'd been practicing her whole life. But there was one room in the restaurant that remained a mystery. The private dining room. It had big wooden doors and no windows. Every Thursday and Saturday night, those doors would close, and Vincent would tell all the servers, "Stay away, no one goes in there." Rebekah would see glimpses when the doors opened. Men in expensive suits with hard faces, smoke from cigars filling the air. the sound of cruel laughter that made her skin crawl. She wasn't stupid. She knew what kind of men they were. Dangerous men. Men who hurt people. Maybe even killed people. But knowing something and seeing it with your own eyes are two very different things. Everything changed on her 15th day at the manor. It was a Thursday night. The restaurant was packed with customers. Rebekah was running between 4 different tables, bringing bread here, taking orders there, when Vincent suddenly appeared beside her. His face was covered in sweat, and he looked terrified. "Rebekah, I need you to serve the private dining room," he said quickly. Rebekah stared at him. "But you said never to go in there." "The other server called in sick. I have no other choice." Vincent grabbed her arm so tight it hurt. "Listen to me. They've already ordered their food. You just need to bring it to them and fill their drinks. Don't talk unless they talk to you first. Don't stare at them. Just do your job and get out. Can you do that?" Every part of Rebekah wanted to say no, but she thought about Marcus, about the hospital bill that was due next week. "Okay," she said quietly. Vincent let out a long breath. "Table 12's food is ready. Take it in now." Rebekah loaded up the tray with expensive appetizers. Fancy bread, expensive cheese, shrimp that probably cost $50. Her hands didn't shake, but her heart was beating so fast she thought it might explode. She walked slowly toward those big wooden doors. She could hear voices inside, deep voices, angry voices, the kind of voices that made normal people run away. Rebekah took a deep breath, balanced the heavy tray on one hand like she'd been trained, and pushed open the door. The room went silent the moment she walked in. There were 8 men sitting around a long table. All of them wore expensive suits. All of them looked at her like a wolf looks at a rabbit. But there was one man who made everyone else look small. He sat at the head of the table, leaning back in his chair like he owned the world. Tattoos covered his neck and crawled up behind his ears. His eyes were dark and cold. His smile was the kind of smile that meant trouble. Chris Hendrix. "Well, well," Chris said slowly, his eyes moving up and down, looking at Rebekah like she was something he might buy. "Who do we have here?" Rebekah remembered Vincent's rules. Don't talk, don't look directly at him. She kept her eyes down and started placing the plates on the table, moving quickly and quietly. "I asked you a question," Chris said, his voice getting harder. "I'm Rebekah, sir," she said softly, still not looking at him. "Your server tonight." One of the other men laughed. "She's scared of you, boss." "Everyone's scared of me," Chris said. But he didn't sound happy about it. He sounded bored. Rebekah finished placing all the food and turned to leave. "Wait," Chris commanded. She froze. "Come here." Rebekah's mind was racing. Every instinct told her to run, but she couldn't. She needed this job. Slowly, she walked toward Chris's end of the table. He leaned forward, studying her face. "Look at me when I'm talking to you." Rebekah lifted her eyes and looked directly at him. And in that moment, something changed. Chris's smile faded. His eyes narrowed. It was like he was seeing her, really seeing her, for the first time. "You're not scared," he said quietly, almost to himself. "Everyone who walks through that door is terrified, but not you. Why?" Rebekah kept her face blank, but inside her old training was waking up. The training from years ago, before she became a waitress. The training that taught her to read an opponent, to find weakness, to never show fear. "I'm just here to do my job, sir," she said calmly. Chris stared at her for a long, tense moment. Then he smiled again, but this time it was a different kind of smile, a dangerous one. "I like you," he said. "You've got spine. What's your name again?" "Rebekah." "Well, Rebekah, you just became my personal server. Every time I'm here, you serve me. Understood?" It wasn't a question. It was an order. "Yes, sir," Rebekah said. She left the room as quickly as she could, her heart pounding. Vincent was waiting outside, his face pale. "What happened?" he whispered urgently. "What did he say?" "He wants me to be his server from now on," Rebekah said quietly. Vincent's eyes went wide. "Oh no! Oh no! No, no!" "What?" Nobody becomes Mr. Hendrix's personal server and walks away unchanged, Vincent said, his voice shaking. He either destroys you or owns you. Rebekah felt a chill run down her spine, but she pushed it away. She had to stay strong. For Marcus, for herself. I can handle it, she said. But deep down, she wondered if that was true. Because she'd seen something in Chris Hendrix's eyes, something that told her he wasn't just a bully, he was a hunter. And now, for some reason, he'd decided she was worth hunting. What Chris didn't know, what nobody knew, was that Rebekah had been a hunter too, once upon a time. And hunters never forget how to fight back. Want to know what happens next? Keep reading to find out how one punch changed everything. The next 3 weeks fell into a strange, tense rhythm. Every Thursday and Saturday night, Rebekah would push open those heavy wooden doors and enter Chris Hendrix's world. She would serve his food, pour his drinks, and disappear like a ghost. And every single time she could feel his eyes following her around the room, watching her every move like a cat watching a mouse. But Rebekah had learned a long time ago how to be invisible. It was a skill she'd perfected years before she ever stepped foot in the manor. Back when her life was completely different. Back when she was someone else entirely. Most people who looked at Rebekah saw exactly what she wanted them to see. A quiet black waitress in a white apron, working hard to pay her bills, nobody special, nobody dangerous. They saw tired eyes and calloused hands. They saw someone who smiled politely and kept her head down. They saw prey. They never saw the predator hiding underneath. Rebekah hadn't always been a waitress. 5 years ago, she'd been something very different. She'd trained in a small underground gym in the worst part of the city, learning Krav Maga from an ex-military instructor named Sarah Chen, who didn't believe in going easy on anyone. Sarah had taught Rebekah that size didn't matter, that fear was a weapon, and that the most dangerous fighter in any room was the one nobody expected. For 3 years, Rebekah had trained 6 days a week, learning how to turn an attacker's strength against them, how to strike at vulnerable points, how to end a fight in seconds. She'd been good at it, really good. Sarah had even talked about her competing, professionally, about making a career out of it. But then Marcus got sick. The doctor said he needed to leave the city, that the pollution and stress were making everything worse. They said he needed constant care in a facility far away, somewhere quiet and safe, somewhere incredibly expensive. So Rebekah had walked away from the gym, from Sarah, from everything she'd worked for. She'd packed up her fighting gear in a box, shoved it under her bed, and become invisible. Because invisible people didn't attract attention. And attention was the last thing she needed when she was barely scraping together enough money to keep Marcus safe. Every 2 weeks, Rebekah would take the bus 3 hours north to visit Marcus in his care facility. It was a beautiful place. Clean rooms, kind nurses, gardens where Marcus could sit and breathe fresh air. It cost almost everything she made at the manor, but it was worth it. Marcus was getting better, slowly but surely. Nobody at the restaurant knew about Marcus. Nobody knew about her past. Vincent thought she was just another struggling server trying to make rent. The other waitresses thought she was quiet and boring. Even Chris Hendrix, with all his power and all his dangerous friends, had no idea who she really was. And that was exactly how Rebekah needed to keep it. But keeping secrets around a man like Chris Hendrix was like trying to hold water in your hands. Eventually, something was going to slip through. Chris ran his criminal empire from that private dining room like a king on a throne. Rebekah had learned to recognize the patterns. Thursday nights were for business. Men would come in with briefcases and leave with envelopes. Saturday nights were for celebration, expensive bottles of champagne, loud laughter, the kind of parties where people forgot to be careful about what they said. Chris himself was impossible to ignore. He moved through the restaurant like he owned not just the building, but every person inside it. When he walked, people stepped aside. When he spoke, everyone listened. When he smiled, people wondered who was about to get hurt. But Rebekah watched him carefully, the way Sarah had taught her to study an opponent. She noticed things. Chris never sat with his back to the door. He touched his neck when he was annoyed. He had a scar on his left hand that he sometimes rubbed when he was thinking. He trusted the man on his right, a huge, bald enforcer everyone called Tank. but watched everyone else with constant suspicion. Chris Hendrix was dangerous, yes, but he was also predictable. And predictable meant vulnerable. Not that Rebekah was planning anything. She just needed to stay invisible, serve the food, collect her tips, and keep Marcus safe. That was the plan. That was the only plan that mattered. But plans have a funny way of falling apart when predators start circling each other. And whether Chris Hendrix knew it or not, he'd invited a predator into his den. It happened on a Saturday night, 3 weeks after Rebekah became Chris's personal server. The private dining room was packed with his crew, 12 men total, all of them drinking expensive whiskey and celebrating something that probably involved someone else's misery. The air was thick with cigar smoke and testosterone. Rebekah had served them dinner without incident. She'd cleared the plates, refilled the drinks, and was preparing to slip out quietly when Chris's voice cut through the noise. "Rebekah, come here." She turned, keeping her face neutral. Chris was leaning back in his chair at the head of the table, that dangerous smile playing on his lips. His eyes were slightly glazed from alcohol, which made him even more unpredictable. "Yes, sir," she said calmly, walking toward him. "My friends here don't believe me," Chris said, gesturing lazily at the men around the table. "I told them I've got the only waitress in this city who doesn't kiss my feet. They think I'm lying. They think everyone's terrified of me." He looked directly at her. "Are you terrified of me, Rebekah?" It was a trap. Rebekah could see it clearly. Say yes, and she'd look weak in front of his crew. Say no, and she'd be challenging him. Either way, Chris was playing a game, and she was the entertainment. "I respect you, sir," she said carefully, "just like I respect all our customers." The men around the table laughed. One of them, a man with a scarred face and mean eyes, shook his head. "Boss, she just called you a customer, like you're some random nobody who wandered in off the street." Chris's smile faded. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. "Is that what you think I am?" Chris asked quietly, standing up. He was tall, much taller than Rebekah, and he used every inch of that height to loom over her. "Just some customer." Rebekah's old training kicked in automatically. She assessed the threat, 6'2", approximately 200 pounds, drunk enough to be reckless, but not drunk enough to be slow. Exit blocked by tank near the door. 12 other men watching, waiting to see what would happen. "I didn't mean any disrespect, sir," Rebekah said, keeping her voice level. "You know what I think?" Chris said, stepping closer. "I think you need to learn your place." He grabbed her wrist, his fingers digging in hard. "I think you need to get on your knees right now and apologize for disrespecting me in front of my people." The room went completely silent. Every man there was watching, waiting to see the waitress break. But something inside Rebekah snapped. She'd spent 5 years being invisible, keeping her head down, swallowing her pride. She'd let people treat her like she was nothing because she needed the money, needed to stay hidden. But there was a line, and Chris Hendrix had just crossed it. In her mind, she heard Sarah Chen's voice from years ago during training. "The moment someone grabs you, they've given you permission to defend yourself. Use their confidence against them." Chris was smiling now, squeezing her wrist harder, expecting her to drop to her knees. He thought he'd won. He thought she was just another person he could break. He was wrong. Rebekah's response was so fast that most of the men didn't even see it happen. She twisted her wrist, using a classic Krav Maga release, breaking Chris's grip instantly. In the same fluid motion, she pivoted her hips and drove her fist straight into his jaw with perfect form. Knuckles aligned, power coming from her legs and core, not just her arm. The sound of impact echoed through the room like a gunshot. Chris stumbled backward, shock spreading across his face. His hand went to his jaw, feeling the blood on his lip. For 3 full seconds, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The most powerful man in the city had just been punched by his waitress. Then all hell broke loose. Tank was already moving toward Rebekah, murder in his eyes. The other men were jumping up from their seats. But Rebekah didn't run. She stood her ground, her hands up in a defensive position, her body automatically falling into a fighting stance she'd practiced 10,000 times. "Stop!" Chris's voice cracked like a whip. Everyone froze. Chris was staring at Rebekah with an expression she couldn't quite read. It wasn't anger. It wasn't even surprise anymore. It was something else. Recognition, maybe, or respect. He touched his bleeding lip and laughed, a genuine laugh that sounded almost delighted. "Well," Chris said slowly, his eyes locked on Rebekah. "Looks like my waitress has claws after all." He smiled, but it was the smile of a predator who'd just found something interesting to hunt. And Rebekah knew in that moment that her life would never be the same again. The private dining room remained frozen in tense silence. Rebekah's heart was pounding, but her hands stayed steady in their defensive position. She'd just punched a Mafia boss in the face, in front of his entire crew. There was no coming back from this. Chris wiped the blood from his lip with his thumb, studying it like it was the most fascinating thing he'd ever seen. Then he looked at Rebekah with those cold, dark eyes that had probably been the last thing a lot of people ever saw. "You know what the problem is with running an empire?" Chris said conversationally, as if they were discussing the weather. "Everyone's too scared to surprise you anymore. Life gets boring when everyone just does what you tell them to." He walked slowly around Rebekah in a circle, like a shark circling prey. She turned with him, keeping him in her line of sight. Sarah's voice echoed in her head. "Never let an opponent get behind you." "But you," Chris continued, stopping directly in front of her. "You just made my night a lot more interesting. Where'd you learn to punch like that?" Rebekah said nothing. Every word she spoke now could make things worse. "Tank!" Chris called out, not taking his eyes off Rebekah. The massive, bald enforcer stepped forward, cracking his knuckles. He looked like he wanted to tear Rebekah apart with his bare hands. "What do you think we should do with someone who hits me?" "Break her arms, boss," Tank said flatly. "Then throw her in the river." Several of the men laughed, but Chris held up one hand, silencing them. "That's the old way of doing things," Chris said. "Boring, predictable." He tilted his head, studying Rebekah like she was a puzzle he was trying to solve. "I've got a better idea. A more entertaining idea." Rebekah's stomach dropped. Nothing good ever came after words like that. "You embarrassed me in front of my people," Chris said. "That can't go unanswered. But you also impressed me, which doesn't happen often. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to fight Tank, a real fight, in my private club downstairs. 3 rounds, or until someone can't continue." "And if I refuse?" Rebekah asked quietly. Chris smiled. "Then Tank breaks both your arms right now. I have you thrown out and you never work in this city again. I'll make sure of it. Every restaurant, every bar, every coffee shop will know your face. You'll be blacklisted everywhere." Rebekah's mind raced. She needed this job. Marcus's next payment was due in 5 days. If she lost this income, she'd lose everything. The care facility, the doctors, all of it. But fighting Tank wasn't like sparring in the gym. Tank was huge, probably 250 pounds of muscle and violence. He'd clearly hurt people before, probably killed them. This wasn't going to be a fair fight with rules and a referee. "What do I get if I win?" Rebekah asked. The room erupted in laughter. Even Chris looked amused. "If you win," Chris repeated. "Sweetheart, Tank hasn't lost a fight in 5 years. He put a professional heavyweight in the hospital last month. You're what, 130 pounds? You won't last 2 minutes." "Then it should be an easy bet," Rebekah said, meeting his eyes. "What do I get if I win?" Chris's smile widened. He liked this. He liked that she wasn't begging or crying. "You've got guts, I'll give you that," he said. "Okay, if by some miracle you actually beat Tank, I'll triple your salary. You'll make more money in 1 month than most people make in 6. And I'll owe you a favor. 1 favor, anything you want, as long as it doesn't involve betraying me or my business." Triple salary would mean she could cover Marcus's care for months, maybe even a full year. It would mean security, safety, breathing room, but it also meant fighting a man who'd put professionals in the hospital. "And if I lose?" Rebekah asked. "When you lose," Chris corrected, "you keep your current job and salary, but you'll know your place from now on. And everyone in this room will know it too." It was a trap disguised as an opportunity. Chris would get his entertainment either way. If Rebekah lost, she'd be humiliated and broken. If she somehow won, he'd own her through that promised favor. But Rebekah thought about Marcos in his clean room with the kind nurses. She thought about the stack of bills on her kitchen counter. She thought about Sarah Chen telling her years ago. "You're tougher than you look. Use that." "When and where?" Rebekah asked. Chris's eyes lit up with genuine excitement. "Tomorrow night, 9 o'clock, the basement club beneath this restaurant. And Rebekah," he leaned in close, his voice dropping to a whisper only she could hear. "I'm really hoping you surprise me again. This city needs more people who aren't afraid to fight back." He stepped away and clapped his hands once. "Gentlemen, clear your schedules for tomorrow night. We've got ourselves a show." As Rebekah left the room, her legs shaking but her head held high, she realized she'd just agreed to something that might get her killed. But she'd been invisible for too long. Maybe it was time to remind the world who she really was, even if it meant bleeding for it. Rebekah didn't sleep that night. She lay in her small apartment, staring at the ceiling, replaying every training session she'd ever had with Sarah Chen. Tank was bigger, stronger, and more experienced in real violence. But Sarah had always said the same thing. Big guys think their size is enough. Make them pay for that mistake. At 7, the next morning, Rebekah pulled the dusty box from under her bed. Inside were her old hand wraps, her training gloves, and a notebook filled with techniques and strategies. She spent the day stretching, shadowboxing, and visualizing the fight. By the time evening arrived, her body remembered what her mind had tried to forget. She was a fighter, and fighters didn't back down. The basement club was everything Rebekah expected and worse. It was a dark, windowless space that smelled like sweat and blood. A boxing ring sat in the center, surrounded by folding chairs already filled with Chris's crew and what looked like other criminals who'd heard about the fight. Money was changing hands everywhere, bets being placed, odds being called out. Nobody was betting on Rebekah. Chris stood near the ring in an expensive suit, looking like he was about to watch his favorite movie. When he saw Rebekah enter wearing simple black athletic clothes, he smiled and gestured her over. "Last chance to back out," he said, though his tone made it clear he didn't want her to. "I'm here to fight," Rebekah said simply. "Good." Chris leaned closer. "Make it interesting at least. Tank tends to end things too quickly." Tank was already in the ring, shirtless and massive. His body was covered in scars, knife wounds, bullet grazes, the kind of marks you got from a life of violence. He was bouncing on his feet, shadowboxing, looking like he could tear through a brick wall. Rebekah climbed into the ring. The crowd erupted in laughter and jeers. Someone shouted, "I give her 30 seconds!" More laughter. A man Rebekah didn't recognize stepped into the ring, apparently the referee. "No rules," he announced. "Fight until someone can't continue or gives up. Understood?" Both fighters nodded. "Begin!" Tank charged immediately, exactly like Rebekah knew he would. Big guys always charged. She sidestepped at the last second, letting his momentum carry him past her. As he stumbled, she delivered a sharp kick to the back of his knee, a vulnerable spot Sarah had drilled into her 1,000 times. Tank went down on one knee, more surprised than hurt. The crowd went quiet. He stood up slowly, his face darkening with anger. "You're quick, won't help you." This time he approached more carefully, throwing heavy punches that would have knocked Rebekah out cold if they'd connected. But they didn't connect. She slipped and ducked, making him miss by inches, letting him waste energy on empty air. Sarah's voice in her head, "Let them get tired, let them get frustrated." Tank was getting both. His punches came faster but sloppier. Rebekah waited for her opening, staying just out of reach, moving like water around his attacks. Then Tank made his mistake. He threw a wild haymaker, putting all his weight behind it. Rebekah ducked under it and stepped inside his guard. The most dangerous place to be with a bigger opponent, but also where their size became a disadvantage. She drove her elbow up into Tank's solar plexus with everything she had. The air exploded from his lungs. Before he could recover, she hooked her leg behind his and used his own forward momentum to throw him to the canvas. A classic Krav Maga takedown. Tank hit the mat hard. The crowd gasped. But Rebekah wasn't done. She'd learned years ago that in a real fight, you didn't give your opponent time to recover. As Tank tried to get up, she delivered a precise kick to his temple. Not hard enough to cause permanent damage, but hard enough to scramble his equilibrium. Tank collapsed, his eyes unfocused, trying to stand, but his legs not cooperating. The referee looked at Chris, who was staring at Rebekah with an expression somewhere between shock and admiration. "It's over," Chris said quietly. The referee raised Rebekah's hand. "Winner!" The basement exploded in chaos. Men were shouting, some in disbelief, others demanding their money back. But Rebekah barely heard them. She was looking at Tank, who was sitting on the canvas now, holding his head, looking like he couldn't believe what had just happened. Chris climbed into the ring, his eyes never leaving Rebekah. He walked right up to her, so close she could see the calculations running behind his eyes. "Where did you really learn to fight?" he asked. "Does it matter?" Rebekah replied, her breathing finally starting to slow. Chris laughed, a genuine, delighted laugh. "No, I suppose it doesn't." He raised his voice so the whole room could hear. "Gentlemen, it seems we've been underestimating our waitress. That ends tonight." He turned back to Rebekah, extending his hand. "Triple salary, just like I promised. And one favor, whenever you need it." Rebekah shook his hand, feeling the calloused strength in his grip. "I just want to do my job and get paid." "Oh, sweetheart," Chris said, that dangerous smile returning. "Your job just changed." The week after the fight, everything changed. Rebekah still wore the white apron and served food, but now when she walked into the private dining room, the men who used to ignore her would nod respectfully. Tank, his pride badly bruised, wouldn't even look at her. And Chris watched her constantly with those calculating eyes, like he was trying to figure out a complicated puzzle. On Thursday night, after the other servers had gone home, Chris called Rebekah into his office, a room she'd never been allowed to enter before. It was smaller than she expected, with dark wood furniture and walls covered in security camera feeds showing every corner of the restaurant. "Sit," Chris said, pouring 2 glasses of expensive whiskey. He pushed one across the desk toward her. Rebekah remained standing. "I don't drink on the job." "You're not on the job anymore." "Not really." Chris leaned back in his chair. "I've been thinking about you all week, about what you did to Tank, about how you've been hiding what you are this whole time." "I'm a waitress," Rebekah said carefully. "You're a weapon pretending to be a waitress," Chris corrected. "And I need weapons I can trust. People in my line of work, they're either loyal or they're scared. But you're neither. You're something different. What do you want from me?" Chris was quiet for a moment, and for the first time since Rebekah had met him, he looked almost vulnerable, almost human. "I'm going to tell you something that would get me killed if my crew knew," he said quietly. "I'm going to trust you because I think you understand what it means to protect someone you love." Rebekah's heart skipped. How could he know about Marcus? Chris must have seen something in her face because he smiled slightly. "I'm good at reading people. You work here for the money, but not for yourself. Someone depends on you, someone you'd do anything to protect." He paused. "I understand that feeling." He opened a drawer and pulled out a photograph. It showed a young woman, maybe 19 or 20, with Chris's same dark eyes. She was smiling at the camera, holding a college textbook. "My sister, Elena," Chris said. "She doesn't know what I do, doesn't know about any of this. She thinks I run a legitimate restaurant business. She's in college studying to be a teacher." His jaw tightened. "And someone is using her to control me." Rebekah sat down slowly. "What do you mean?" "There's a woman named Anya Volkov. She runs the drug trade on the east side. 6 months ago, she approached me wanting to use my restaurant for distribution. I said no. I deal in other things, but I don't touch drugs. Too messy, too much heat from the police." Chris's hand clenched into a fist. 2 weeks later, Anya sent me photos of Elena leaving class. Elena at the library, Elena at her apartment. The message was clear. Work with Anya, or Elena disappears. "So you're working with her," Rebekah said. "I have no choice. Anya has people watching Elena constantly. If I make a move against her, if I go to the police, if I do anything, Elena dies. And Anya knows I'll burn the world down if that happens, so she keeps me on a leash." Chris looked directly at Rebekah. "I'm the most feared man in this city, and I'm trapped by one woman with a photograph." Rebekah understood that feeling more than Chris could know. Being powerful, but helpless. Having skills but being unable to use them because someone you loved was being held hostage, even if the cage was invisible. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. "Because I saw how you fought Tank. You're disciplined, trained, smart. You think 3 moves ahead." Chris leaned forward. "And because I think you understand what it's like to be a predator, forced to act like prey. I need someone Anya doesn't know about. Someone who can move without being watched. Someone who can help me get Elena somewhere safe so I can finally deal with Anya the way she deserves." "You want me to help you fight a war," Rebekah said. "I want you to help me save my sister. After that, you can walk away with enough money to never worry again. Or you can stay and be part of something bigger than serving pasta to criminals." Rebekah thought about Marcus, safe in his facility. Thought about the bills that never stopped coming. Thought about 5 years of being invisible, of swallowing her pride, of pretending to be weak. "What makes you think I can trust you?" she asked. Chris smiled grimly. "Because we're the same, you and me. We're both predators wearing disguises. We're both protecting someone who makes us vulnerable, and we're both tired of pretending." He pushed a folder across the desk. "That's everything I know about Anya's operation. Her schedule, her properties, her security. Look it over. Think about it. But decide fast because Anya's getting impatient, and impatient people make mistakes that get innocent people killed." Rebekah picked up the folder, feeling its weight. This was a line she'd never intended to cross. Getting involved with Chris's criminal world was dangerous. But the money he was offering could change everything. Could give Marcus years of care. Could give her freedom. "I'll think about it," she said. "That's all I ask." Chris raised his glass. "To predators in disguise." Rebekah didn't toast, but she didn't leave either, and that was answer enough. Do me a favor and subscribe. It helps this channel grow so I can keep bringing you stories about people who refuse to stay victims. Plus, you'll never miss an upload. Now let's get back to the action. Rebekah spent 2 days studying the folder Chris had given her. She spread the papers across her small kitchen table. Surveillance photos of Anya Volkov, blueprints of her properties, schedules of her security team. The more she read, the more she understood why Chris was trapped. Anya's operation was professional, thorough, and ruthless. But Rebekah also saw the weaknesses, the patterns, the predictable routines that could be exploited. On Saturday morning, she took the bus 3 hours north to visit Marcus. He was in the garden when she arrived, sitting in his wheelchair with a book in his lap. He looked better than he had in months, color in his cheeks, strength in his smile. "Beck!" he called out, using his childhood nickname for her. "You're early this week." Rebekah sat on the bench beside him, taking his hand. He was 22 now, but in moments like this, he looked like the little brother she'd raised after their parents died. The brother she'd sacrificed everything to protect. "How are you feeling?" she asked. "Good days lately," Marcus said. "Dr. Williams says if this keeps up, I might be able to try physical therapy soon, maybe even walk again someday." His smile faded when he saw her face. "What's wrong? You've got that look." "What look?" "The look you had when you quit fighting. The look that says you're carrying something heavy and won't let anyone help." Marcus squeezed her hand. "Talk to me, Beck." Rebekah wanted to tell him everything. About Chris, about Anya, about the choice she was facing. But she'd spent 5 years protecting Marcus from the harsh realities of how she kept him safe. He thought she worked at a normal restaurant. He didn't know about the criminals, the danger, the constant fear. "Just work stuff," she said. "Nothing for you to worry about." "You always say that." Marcus studied her face. "You know what Mom used to say? She said you were born fighting. Even as a baby, you never cried when you fell down. You just get back up, angry, ready to try again." He smiled softly. "Whatever you're facing, Beck, I know you'll figure it out. You always do." Rebekah felt tears threatening, but pushed them back. "I love you, Marcus." "Love you too." "And Beck?" He waited until she looked at him. "Stop sacrificing yourself for me. I'm getting better. You're allowed to have a life too." But that was exactly the problem. Rebekah's life had become about keeping Marcus safe. And now Chris was offering her a chance to secure that safety permanently. All it would cost was stepping back into the world she'd left behind. The world of violence and danger. the world where she'd always belonged. That night, Rebekah walked into Chris's office and placed the folder on his desk. "I'm in," she said simply. Chris looked up from his computer, surprise flickering across his face. "Just like that?" "I read everything. I saw the patterns. I know how to get to Elena and extract her safely." Rebekah pulled out one of the surveillance photos. "Anya moves Elena's watchers every 72 hours. There's a 6-hour window during the shift change when coverage is weakest. That's our opportunity." Chris stood, coming around the desk. "Our opportunity? You've already got a plan?" "The beginning of one, but I need to know more. I need to see Anya's primary warehouse, where she keeps her records. If we're going to move against her, we need leverage of our own. Something that makes her too afraid to retaliate." "That warehouse is a fortress. Armed guards, cameras everywhere, attack dogs at night." "Then we don't go at night," Rebekah said. "We go during business hours when she's there. Hide in plain sight." Chris stared at her for a long moment, then laughed. That genuine laugh she'd only heard a few times. "You're actually serious." "I'm committing to this, which means we do it right. No half measures. We get Elena to safety, we get evidence against Anya, and we make sure she can never threaten anyone you love again." Rebekah met his eyes. "But I need something from you first." "Name it." "The favor you owe me from the fight. I want it in writing. I want a guarantee that if anything happens to me, my brother's medical care is paid for. For life." Understanding crossed Chris's face. "So that's who you're protecting? A brother?" "His name is Marcus. He's everything to me." Rebekah's voice didn't waver. "If I'm risking my life for your sister, you're guaranteeing my brother's future. That's the deal." Chris extended his hand. "You have my word, and I'll put it in writing tonight, signed and witnessed by my lawyer. Your brother will be taken care of no matter what happens." Rebekah shook his hand, feeling the weight of what she'd just committed to. She was stepping out of the shadows, risking the invisibility that had kept her and Marcus safe for 5 years. But Marcus was right. She was born fighting. And maybe it was time to stop hiding from what she really was. "When do we start?" Chris asked. "Tomorrow, we scout the warehouse, learn the routines, and find our way in." Rebekah allowed herself a small smile. "Time to remind Anya Volkov that predators come in unexpected packages." The warehouse sat in the industrial district, a massive concrete building surrounded by chain-link fences and security cameras. For 3 days, Rebekah and Chris had watched from different positions, learning the patterns. Guard rotations every 4 hours. Delivery trucks arriving between 2 and 4 in the afternoon. Anya herself showing up at 3 o'clock every Tuesday and Thursday to personally oversee shipments. It was Thursday afternoon, and they were about to walk straight through the front door. "You're sure about this?" Chris asked from the driver's seat of the unmarked van. He was wearing a delivery uniform that made him look almost normal. "Almost." "Confidence sells the lie," Rebekah said, adjusting her own uniform, clipboard in hand, looking every bit like a logistics supervisor. "We're not sneaking in. We belong here. That's what they'll believe." They'd spent the previous night creating fake delivery manifests and authorization codes that Rebekah had pulled from intercepted emails. Chris had been impressed by her ability to forge documents. She'd been trained by Sarah to think tactically, and tactics weren't just about fighting. They were about exploiting weaknesses in any system. Chris pulled the van up to the security gate. A guard approached, bored and tired. This was the critical moment, the first test of whether their cover would hold. "Delivery for Building C," Chris said casually, handing over the forged paperwork. The guard scanned it, frowned, then checked his computer. Rebekah's heart pounded, but her face remained neutral. The documents should match the system. Should. "You're not on the schedule," the guard said suspiciously. Rebekah leaned forward from the passenger seat. "Because your dispatch didn't update the system again. 3rd time this month." She sighed dramatically, holding up her clipboard. "Look, we've got 4 more stops after this. You want to call Ms. Volkov and tell her why her shipment is late. Be my guest. But I'm not taking the heat for your IT problems." The mention of Anya's name did exactly what Rebekah hoped. The guard's face paled slightly. Nobody wanted to bother Anya Volkov with minor issues. "Fine, go ahead," he muttered, waving them through. "Building C, loading dock 2. They drove through the gate, and Chris let out a breath he'd been holding. "That was too close." "That was perfect," Rebekah corrected. "He believed us because we acted like we belonged. Now comes the hard part." They backed the van up to loading dock 2 as instructed. Workers moved around them, loading and unloading trucks, nobody paying them any attention. Chris and Rebekah grabbed empty boxes from the van and walked into the warehouse like they'd done it 100 times before. The interior was exactly as the blueprints had shown. Rows of storage containers, offices along the back wall, and a central staircase leading to a second-floor office with windows overlooking the entire operation. That office belonged to Anya. "There," Rebekah whispered, nodding toward a door marked Records. According to the intelligence Chris had gathered, that room contained Anya's insurance, digital files, and physical documents on everyone she did business with, including politicians, police officers, and judges she'd bought or blackmailed. 2 guards stood near the door, armed but relaxed. They weren't expecting trouble from inside. Rebekah set down her boxes and walked directly toward them, clipboard raised. "Excuse me, I need to verify inventory counts for Ms. Volkov. She's expecting my report in 20 minutes. One guard frowned. "Nobody told us about an inventory check." "Of course they didn't. Does anyone ever tell you anything?" Rebekah tapped her clipboard impatiently. "Look, I can go upstairs and ask Ms. Volkov to come down here and explain it to you personally. I'm sure she'll be thrilled." The guards exchanged uncomfortable looks. Finally, one of them pulled out a keycard and opened the door. "Make it quick." Rebekah and Chris entered the records room. The moment the door closed behind them, they moved fast. Chris went to the computer terminal, while Rebekah searched the file cabinets. They had maybe 10 minutes before someone got suspicious. "Find the Elena file," Rebekah whispered, "and anything on police payoffs." Chris's fingers flew over the keyboard, inserting a USB drive that would copy the entire hard drive. "Got it. Elena's surveillance schedules, photos, everything. And holy hell, Anya's got files on half the police department." Rebekah pulled a thick folder from a cabinet labeled Insurance. Inside were photographs, bank records, and documents detailing bribes and blackmail material. It was everything they needed. 2 minutes, Chris warned, watching the progress bar on his screen. Footsteps approached outside. Voices. Rebekah's hand instinctively moved to her waist where she'd hidden a small tactical knife. Not enough to fight their way out, but enough to create a distraction if necessary. The door opened. One of the guards stuck his head in. "Time's up. Ms. Volkov wants to see whoever authorized this inventory check." Rebekah smiled calmly. "Perfect timing. We just finished." She held up her clipboard, showing random check marks. "Everything matches the system. Tell Ms. Volkov her inventory is secure." The guard looked suspicious, but stepped aside to let them pass. Chris palmed the USB drive as they walked out, boxes back in their hands, heading toward the exit like they had every right to be there. They were almost to the van when Rebekah heard a voice that made her blood run cold. "You there? Stop." She turned slowly. Anya Volkov stood on the loading dock, flanked by 4 armed men. She was smaller than Rebekah expected, maybe 5'5", but she radiated danger like heat from a fire. Her eyes were ice-cold blue, and they were fixed directly on Rebekah and Chris. "I don't recognize you," Anya said quietly, "and I know everyone who works in my facility." Time seemed to slow down. Rebekah calculated angles, distances, possibilities. 4 armed guards, no cover, 20 yards to the van. They'd never make it, unless she created an opening. "Run when I move," Rebekah whispered to Chris. Then she smiled at Anya and did the last thing anyone expected. She walked directly toward her. Rebekah walked toward Anya Volkov with her hands visible, clipboard still in hand, projecting absolute confidence. Behind her, she sensed Chris tensing, ready to react. The 4 armed guards raised their weapons slightly, but Anya held up one hand, stopping them. "Interesting," Anya said, her accent thick, Russian or Ukrainian. "Most people run when they're caught. You walked toward me. Why? Because running would prove we're guilty, Rebekah said calmly, stopping 10 feet away. And we're not guilty of anything except doing our jobs poorly. Our dispatch sent us to the wrong facility. Our mistake. Anya's cold blue eyes studied Rebekah like a scientist examining an insect. You're lying, but you're good at it. I respect that. She tilted her head. However, I don't believe in coincidences, and two strangers showing up on the same day I'm expecting complications. That feels like a coincidence. It's not a coincidence, Chris said, stepping forward. His voice had changed, no longer the delivery driver, but the Mafia boss Rebekah had first met. It's an opportunity for you to make a smart decision, Anya. Recognition flashed across Anya's face. Chris Hendrix, how bold of you to walk into my warehouse. She laughed, but it was cold. Kill them both. The guards raised their weapons. Before you do that, Rebekah said loudly, you should know that everything in your records room, every file, every photograph, every piece of blackmail material you've collected, is currently being uploaded to a secure server. If we don't check in within the next 15 minutes, all of it gets sent to the FBI, the state police, and every news outlet in the city. Anya's smile vanished. You're bluffing. Chris pulled out his phone, showing the screen. A progress bar read, upload 87% complete. We had someone on the inside install a remote access program last week. While we were distracting your guards today, our associate triggered it. Right now, Agent Rivera at the FBI is about to receive very interesting information about which judges and cops you own. It was a complete bluff. They had no inside person. The USB drive in Chris's pocket was the only copy they'd made. But Anya didn't know that. And in this moment, uncertainty was their greatest weapon. You wouldn't dare, Anya said, but her voice had lost its certainty. That information implicates you too, Hendrix. You've worked with me for months. Under duress, with documented proof that you threatened my sister. Chris's voice turned to ice. I've been building my own insurance policy, Anya. Screenshots of your threats, recordings of our conversations, testimony from people you've coerced. When the FBI gets that file, they'll see exactly what you are. And they'll see that I was your victim, not your partner. Anya's hand moved to her hip, where Rebekah spotted the outline of a gun. The guards' fingers tightened on their triggers. This could go wrong very fast. Here's what's going to happen, Rebekah said, her voice cutting through the tension. You're going to call off all surveillance on Elena Hendrix. You're going to delete every photo, every file, every piece of information you have on her. And you're going to forget Chris exists. And why would I do that? Anya asked. Because if you don't, we'll destroy you. Chris stepped forward. But here's what you might not know about me, Anya. I don't actually want to destroy you. Your operation doesn't compete with mine. We could have coexisted peacefully. You forced this confrontation by threatening my family. So this is about family, Anya said slowly. Something shifted in her expression. You would burn everything down for one girl. Without hesitation, Chris said. Anya was quiet for a long moment, her eyes moving between Chris and Rebekah. Finally, she lowered her hand from her gun. I understand family loyalty. My own brother was killed by people who thought threats would control me. They learned otherwise. She pulled out her phone and made a call, speaking rapid Russian. When she finished, she looked back at Chris. Elena's watchers are being recalled. All files deleted. But understand this, Hendrix. We are done. You don't work for me, I don't work for you. Our territories don't touch. If I see you again, this conversation will go very differently. Agreed, Chris said. And you, Anya turned to Rebekah. You fight like someone with military training, clean, efficient, tactical. Where did you learn? Somewhere else, in another life, Rebekah said. Anya smiled slightly. We are all someone else in another life. She gestured to her guards to lower their weapons. Go, before I change my mind. And Hendrix, delete whatever you copied from my records. We both walk away clean, or we both burn. Choose wisely. Chris and Rebekah walked back to the van, every muscle tensed, expecting bullets. But none came. They climbed in, and Chris started the engine with shaking hands. Did we just survive? That he asked as they drove through the gate. We survived, Rebekah confirmed. But more importantly, Elena's safe, and Anya knows that threatening your family again means mutual destruction. Chris drove in silence for several blocks, then pulled over and let out a long breath. Thank you. For everything. For risking your life for someone you've never met. I know what it's like to protect family, Rebekah said simply. Now keep your promise about Marcus. Already done. The paperwork was filed this morning. Your brother's care is guaranteed for life, regardless of what happens to me. For the first time in 5 years, Rebekah felt something she'd almost forgotten. Safety, not just for herself, but for Marcus. The constant weight she'd been carrying finally lifted. What now? Chris asked. Rebekah looked out the window at the city passing by. Now we both get to stop pretending. 3 months later, Rebekah stood in the middle of an empty warehouse space on the west side of the city. Sunlight streamed through the high windows, illuminating dust particles floating in the air. The space smelled like fresh paint and possibility. What do you think? Chris asked, walking through the door carrying 2 cups of coffee. He looked different now, less like a mafia boss and more like a regular businessman. The tattoos were still there, but he wore them differently somehow. More comfortable, less threatening. It's perfect, Rebekah said, taking the coffee. Enough space for training mats, a boxing ring, maybe some weights in the back, and those offices upstairs can be private consultation rooms. After the confrontation with Anya, everything had changed. Chris had quietly dismantled his criminal operations, selling off territories to people he trusted, closing down the illegal parts of his business. The restaurant still existed, but now it was legitimate, just an upscale place to eat, nothing more. He'd set Elena up in a new apartment across the country, told her the truth about what he'd been, and given her the choice to cut him out of her life, or accept him anyway. She'd chosen to stay, on the condition that he leave that world behind. So he had. Rebekah had quit the manor the day after they'd escaped Anya's warehouse. She'd visited Marcus and told him the truth. Not everything, but enough. About the fighting, about the danger, about how she'd secured his future. Marcus had cried and hugged her and told her he was proud, that maybe now she could finally live for herself too. But Rebekah had realized something important during those 3 months. She didn't want to go back to being invisible. She didn't want to hide what she was anymore. And when Chris had called her with an idea, she'd known immediately it was right. Guardian training and security, Chris said, reading from the business license paperwork. Tactical self-defense instruction, personal security services, and private consultation. That's what the official documents say. And unofficially? Rebekah asked. Unofficially, we help people who are trapped, people like we were. Chris set down his coffee and pulled out a folder. I've already got our first client, a woman named Sarah Martinez. Her ex-husband is a cop, and he's been stalking her for 6 months. She's terrified, and the police won't help because they protect their own. Rebekah took the folder, scanning the details. She saw the pattern immediately. The surveillance, the intimidation, the systematic isolation. He's trying to break her down, make her vulnerable. Exactly. But if someone were to teach her tactical self-defense, help her document everything properly, and maybe have a conversation with her ex about how his harassment has been noticed by people who don't care about his badge. Chris trailed off meaningfully. We make sure he knows he's the prey now, not her, Rebekah finished. Precisely. Over the next hour, they walked through the space, planning. Training area here, office space there, a secure room for sensitive consultations. They would teach people to fight, not for violence, but for confidence, for the ability to protect themselves and their families. And for those who needed more than training, who needed extraction from dangerous situations or protection from people the law couldn't touch, Guardian would provide that too. 2 weeks later, they held their first class. 15 people showed up, mostly women, but a few men too. All of them carried the same look Rebekah recognized from her own mirror. People who'd been made to feel powerless. People who were tired of being afraid. Sarah Martinez stood in the front row, nervous but determined. My name is Rebekah, she began, standing at the front of the room. Chris stood beside her, arms crossed, a silent presence of strength. And I'm going to teach you something important. You're stronger than you think, tougher than people have told you, and nobody, no matter how big, how powerful, how dangerous they seem, has the right to make you afraid. She demonstrated a basic defensive stance, and the class mimicked her movements. The people who hurt others count on you staying quiet. They count on you feeling weak. They count on you believing you can't fight back. Rebekah met Sarah's eyes, then looked at each person in the room. We're here to prove them wrong. After the class, Sarah approached Rebekah with tears in her eyes. Thank you. For the first time in months, I feel like maybe I can do this. You can, Rebekah assured her. And if you need more help, we're here. That night, after everyone had left, Rebekah and Chris sat on the training mats, exhausted but satisfied. We did good today, Chris said. We did, Rebekah agreed. You know what's funny? Chris leaned back on his hands. I spent 15 years being someone people feared, building an empire on intimidation. And now, teaching people not to be afraid? This feels more powerful than anything I ever did before. Rebekah understood exactly what he meant. For 5 years, she'd hidden her strength because she thought invisibility equaled safety. But real safety didn't come from hiding. It came from being strong enough that nobody could make you hide. Her phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. Heard about your new business. I'm proud of you, Beck. Mom and Dad would be too. She showed Chris the message, smiling. To new beginnings, Chris said, raising an imaginary glass. To becoming who we were, always meant to be, Rebekah corrected. They'd both been predators, pretending to be prey. But now they were something better, protectors, people who used their strength not to dominate others, but to help others find their own strength. The warehouse had been empty when they'd found it, but now it was full of purpose, full of hope, full of people learning that being underestimated was the predator's greatest advantage. And Rebekah and Chris would make sure no one ever had to face their monsters alone. And that's how a waitress became a warrior. If you loved Rebekah's journey from invisible to unstoppable, show some love by hitting subscribe and the like button. Drop a comment telling me what you thought. Did Chris and Rebekah's ending surprise you? What story should I tell next? Your support keeps these stories coming, and I'll see you in the next one.